So last week, Jordan Love went on to Micah Parsons' podcast, and they talked about a lot of different things. But one thing I want to focus on is one of the discussions they were having about potential free agents, and Jordan shared a quote that gave us some insight into, how the Packers front office is operating. And as I was reading through this, listening to it, it made me think back to Aaron Rodgers back in 2021 when things were pretty complicated between Rodgers and the front office and Brian Gutekunst, and Aaron Rodgers had been wanting a lot more say in the free agent moves the Packers were making. He was wanting to basically offer his services as a recruiter and help bring different kinds of free agents into Green Bay. And Rodgers did not feel as if his opinion was really wanted by the Packers. It felt like he didn't really get any kind of say in those conversations. And I think when you're Rodgers at that point in his career, being in Green Bay for so long, I think it's pretty understandable that Rodgers, would have some kind of input and give some opinion, which is valuable to the Packers front office. And so on that note, let me read this quote here from Jordan Love. So first off, Micah and him are talking about some random free agents. Love is basically saying any guy Micah would bring up, he'd say, basically, I'm all for adding solid players. And then Jordan says this regarding the front office: I let those guys work. You know what I mean? I let those guys work. Micah says, nah, you're the franchise. You are the franchise. Jordan says, yeah, but man, hey, look, that's what they do. They get paid to do that, and I think Goody is very good at what he does, man. He brings in some very talented players, so, you'll have your opinions. You'll give him some insight, but at the end of the day, they're going to do what they think is best for the organization, man. And so when I heard that, as I said, it brought me back to Aaron Rodgers during his time in Green Bay. And of course, Jordan is at a very different spot in his career, but it sounds like right now he is at least giving some kind of insight to Brian Gutekunst. And so I do wonder how that goes if they have a meeting and Brian Gutekunst asks, what Jordan Love thinks the Packers need, or I'm not sure how that could go. That's pretty interesting to me, but he's at least giving some kind of insight to Brian Gutekunst. But it looks like the roles are pretty defined. Gutekunst is the decision maker. The front office makes the moves. But it looks at least like Gutekunst has allowed Jordan to give him some kind of insight. So that's sort of interesting. I'm not sure if that's different than when Gutekunst and Rodgers were together. And I was wondering, maybe with the whole situation with Rodgers when he publicly explained that he wanted more input, maybe that did lead Gutekunst to change the way he operates a little bit. I'm not super convinced about that, but it's at least a possibility. And I actually went back to Aaron Rodgers' training camp press conference that was massive at the time because we were very unsure about what the Packers were going to do when it came to Rodgers and his future. And I was rewatching it, and it brought me back to, when Rodgers was there, Devontae. Made me sad a little bit, to be honest. But there are a few quotes I got from here that I was remembering sort of how things were going back then. And here's what Rodgers said. He said, I expressed my desire to be more involved with conversations directly affecting my job. Also, I wanted to help the organization maybe learn from some of the mistakes in the past, in my opinion, about the way that some of the outgoing veterans were treated. And I think looking at how looking at how Aaron Jones left the Packers last year, he looked pretty frustrated. The Packers, to him, it seemed like he maybe felt like the Packers sort of lowballed him. I think he made $1 million more with the Vikings than he would have made with the Packers if he hit all the incentives. And so I'm not sure that the Packers have changed their philosophy when it comes to veterans. It feels like the Packers are willing to move on from guys who are key kind of locker room guys, and that's one thing Rodgers had brought up, that he thought it was important to bring back certain players that were big for the locker room. So I'm not convinced that the Packers front office and organization has, completely taken what Rodgers said and changed their philosophy and how they do things. And I think, just looking at Jordan Love in his career, it's something that will be interesting to watch as time goes forward. And it felt to me like Rodgers, before, 2020, 2021, he had never really been that honest and that upfront as he was in that press conference in 2021. And it does make you wonder, as the years go by and, seeing what happened with Rodgers, when you have these veteran quarterbacks who are, become the face of a franchise and have that long period of success and they sort of become a legend in wherever they're playing, I think it's pretty understandable for them to have a somewhat sizable say. And Jordan Love is not at that point. And at the end of the day, I think that it's probably smart for the Packers to operate where, the front office makes the decisions, not that other teams are, letting players come in and make decisions. But it does sound to me like, from reading different things from time to time, that there are some other quarterbacks that seem to have maybe more say than Packers quarterbacks have had, with Rodgers and even with Jordan Love. But considering, at the end of the day, you never know what's going to happen with these quarterbacks either. Rodgers got traded, and Rodgers was even saying in that press conference that I was rewatching that he had wanted to be a Packer his whole career. And I think that on the one hand, if you're an organization and you're making these decisions, it could be cool to be able to have, these guys stay on the Packers for their whole career. But when they reach the later years of their career, if they don't want to stop playing football, if you're the Packers organization, from a football perspective, it makes much more sense to let guys go and not pay them more than you think you have to pay them. And so I think in the long run, your football team is probably going to be better. But it looks like lots of Packers players have left the organization feeling pretty frustrated, and I feel like Aaron Jones was one of them as well. You could tell that he seemed pretty upset that, the team that he had been such a focal point of for so long was, not willing to retain him, wanted him to take basically a 50% pay cut. And I feel, I understand those kind of frustrations. And so just when it comes to looking at how this franchise operates, hearing Jordan Love say that, it does make me wonder, how much insight he's giving Brian Gutekunst. But it looks like Jordan understands the way that things operate. And I, Jordan has not reached that level where, Rodgers reached, where it would make more sense for Rodgers to have that kind of say, or at least have more input, because I do think his opinion was valuable. And then thinking about the Packers and free agency this year, we've already seen Josh Jacobs out there talking about all these other players he wants. He shared that he's talked with a few guys. Let me read this quote he shared last week. This is from Bill Huber on Sports Illustrated, shared this quote from Jacobs. Jacobs said, "Put it like this, man. I've talked to a few guys. Obviously, I can't actually recruit them, but I'm just like, look, if you're thinking about it, this place is not going to disappoint you. We don't have an owner. Everybody's on the same page from the top to the bottom. It's organized. We get in, we get out. You spend time with your family, and they take care of them." And I mean, that's the biggest thing. And so it looks like Jacobs is just going out of his way, talking to guys who could be potential free agents and letting them know how awesome Green Bay is and why they should come to Green Bay. And I think it's awesome that Jacobs is doing this, because let's say Brian Gutekunst, the Packers front office, they have some free agents that they want to target. If Jacobs has already talked to some of these guys and shared some of these things, maybe that could help them make that decision and feel comfortable coming to Green Bay. And when it comes to, convincing free agents to come to Green Bay, I think that in times past it seemed like maybe certain guys wouldn't want to come to Green Bay just because it's a smaller city. Some guys may not want to live that kind of life and be in a place like Green Bay. And I think now with the Packers being a very solid team, I do think that it has to be intriguing to certain kind of players. I do feel like you need a certain kind of guy who is, wants to come to Green Bay and play in the cold and things like that. But I do think it's helpful to have teammates, veterans, going out of their way to try to help convince guys to come to Green Bay. And that's one thing that Rodgers really wanted. What he spoke about in 2021 was wanting to help the Packers in those free agent recruitments, if you call it that. And here's a quote from Rodgers in 2021. "And the other part in February was wanting to be more involved in conversations involving free agents, which has never happened in my career." And he said he had tried to pass along information, but it hadn't really been used. And so he said he wanted to offer his services as a recruiter, which I feel like is completely understandable. And I'm honestly shocked that at that time, the Packers had not used Rodgers to try to recruit or convince different free agents to come to Green Bay. I think that if you're Gutekunst, that's something that I think makes a lot of sense. And even now, I don't know how Gutekunst and Love's relationship is. It seems fine. I don't know how much they talk to each other. They at least talk a little bit, clearly, because Love has given him some insights. But if the Packers are, trying to get different guys into Green Bay, and let's say Gutekunst has a few free agents that are maybe on the top of the Packers list, it would make lots of sense to, have someone like Love be able to help maybe convince someone, to come to Green Bay whenever, free agency opens and things like that. So I don't know if the Packers will change the way they operate in that way, but I think it's at least good to see Josh Jacobs, even though I bet he's not, out here doing this because Gutekunst wants him to necessarily. It sounds like Jacobs is just doing what he thinks is best for the team, trying to convince guys to come to Green Bay. But it's interesting to sort of watch all these different kinds of things play out. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys next time.